Hi, welcome to Messages of Joy. Today we are interviewing Destiny Catalina, the Harlequin Witch. Hi, Destiny.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Are you ready to get started?
Yep.
Okay. So how did you get started as being a reader?
So growing up, my mom used to be really interested in learning about different kind of religions and things like that. So from a very young age, me and all of my siblings were introduced to reading and crystals and things like that. So I remember, even being young and having like tarot decks and things like that. So a few years ago, my mom brought home an oracle card deck called the Oracle of Vision, and I promptly stole it because it was one of the only decks that I had really resonated with, and I just kind of grabbed onto it and took off from there.
That's fun. So how long have you been doing this work, and at what point would you say that you started doing it professionally?
So I feel like that's almost like a trick question because I feel like I've been doing this for a long time, but I feel like professionally I've only been doing it for maybe 2 or 3 years. As far as there are people that are actually paying me for work, but that isn't necessarily to say that I wasn't doing the work beforehand. So a few years, I guess, but prior to that, there was a lot of house clearings and just learning and with groups of people and things like that. So if that answers it.
Yeah. So when did you recognize that you had this gift?
So there's always a story that I like to tell where there was an incident when I was about maybe 13 or 14. And at the time, I was sharing a bed with my little sister. And there was an event where I woke up in the middle of the night and the blanket had actually domed over me. And I always like credit that event to kind of changing the way that I saw everything that was going on around me, because up until that point, it had mostly just been the stuff that my mom was interested in and, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't necessarily that I was not interested, but it wasn't that I didn't give it enough credit. And after that event where, I woke up in the night and there was something obviously physically there that I couldn't deny, that is when I really felt like everything started to open up for me and everything started to kind of fall into place. But it wasn't until I was maybe 18 or 19 before I really started to dive into it in a more adult way of looking at things as opposed to just the mystical side of it. When I started to really look at things from that age, it changed from it's just another religion or it's just something else to really looking into seeing what the background history of the crystals were and the different kinds of magic that people were doing and how they all kind of fit in together. But it was about overall, I would probably say that there were 2 points in my life, one of which when I was about 13 and one of which was when I was about 19.
Nice. So what is your motivation for this?
So there have been several times where I feel like, especially because I'm in it every single day, that I almost feel like sometimes it's not worth it. I'm not really getting anything out of it. I don't necessarily feel like I'm doing anything or helping anyone, et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, it just takes one person to come to you and say that the words that you said to them changed their life or whatever it was that you did, whether it was a reading or a house clearing or whatever it was that changed their outlook. That is really the motivation behind it. When you are told that something you did helped them genuinely, it changes your aspect from this is just a job or this is just work or this is just for fun or whatever to something that you have impact on people's lives and you genuinely change them.
So how do you connect with spirit?
So I feel like one of the easiest ways for me to kind of sit down and just connect is obviously through the cards, but even saying that, it's not necessarily representing it as a whole. I always say that the closest I've ever felt to God was when I was in nature. And I also feel like the closest I feel like to any gods is when I do any kind of magic work, especially when, I take the baths or I do the candles and things like that. like an innate feeling that spirit or God or the universe is always around you. And being able to tap into that in any facet is so rewarding. So finding that you can kind of attach to it in multiple ways is kind of exciting.
How do you prepare before you do a session?
So I don't necessarily feel like there's a lot of preparation that is involved, and I don't necessarily feel like there should be a lot of preparation for what I do. There are always the general protections you put up, the energy that I'm about to be working with is not mine. I don't want to take it on, et cetera, et cetera. But before I do a reading or before I, do a house clearing or whatever, the general rule of thumb for me is just to call in my gods, my guides to step in around me so that I'm not taking home anything I shouldn't be or working with any energy I shouldn't be, and I'm not tapping into information I shouldn't be tapping into. But I feel like before just regular sessions or just a general card reading, there's not really a lot of preparations that I have to make.
So what kind of sessions do you offer? What do you do?
So my reading sessions, I read oracle cards. Oracle cards are a very intuitive way, I feel, to be able to connect because the pictures on the cards are all that you have. There are generally instruction books for oracle cards, but there's not any kind of set structure for any of the decks. Every deck is different. So you can kind of get in touch with yourself, get in touch with spirit, get in touch with, the people that you're reading for through the cards without necessarily having to learn a whole lot of background history on them or anything like that. So that's my primary kind of thing that I do as far as readings go. My other focus is, of course, with the magic work. So I teach different magic classes. My most popular classes that I teach are the Essentials of Witchcraft Volume 1 and the Candle Magic class. Both of those classes seem to be pretty popular, and I've gotten a lot of really good feedback from them with the information that they have at least been able to gain from it. That being said, I feel like my primary focus is the magic side of it as opposed to doing readings or teaching cards or anything like that. Just because I feel like magic in general can kind of help you to get in touch with yourself, as well as feeling like you can really connect with, the people around you or spirit or manifesting, just to get in touch with that kind of energy and understand what it feels like.
Right. So what can someone expect during a session?
So if you're coming to me for a general card reading, then you can pretty much generally expect that we're going to touch on whatever it is that's important to you that's happening at that time. You can do a general reading where we can just see what comes up, if it's job related or if it's family life and things like that, or we can look at specifics. So if you're, for example, if you're trying to get a promotion at work and you're really trying to figure out how that's going to play out for you in the long run, then we can look and see what your best options are around it. Alternatively, we can also look and see how there are outside sources affecting what it is that you're doing. So if you can't quite seem to get ahead, or if you feel like you've got a lot of bad luck around you, things like that, we can look and see what's going on. And then generally, after I'm done with readings, I normally make recommendations as far as what crystals can help with the situation at hand, but also a lot of the times I'll recommend different candles and things like that I'll fix or prepare for clients of mine to kind of help change the energy that's around a situation or to help accentuate it.
So how do your sessions differ from what people see on TV, like John Edwards or the lady in Jersey?
Teresa Caputo, I think.
Yeah.
So I feel like they do and they don't. I don't necessarily do mediumship. I do channel, but a lot of the times who you see on TV typically talk to people who've crossed over. And I don't necessarily do that just a whole lot. There are times that I connect to it, but it's not often. And it's not necessarily something that I'm very interested in doing in the long run anyway, because of just the way that energy kind of makes me feel. Aside from that, I feel like in general, whenever people are doing card readings versus channeled readings or mediumship readings, it's going to feel a lot different because there's something tangible for you to see in front of you for a reader to interpret. And for me to kind of show the client or the person who's getting a reading, where I'm getting the information from. So I feel like as far as people getting readings, whether or not they want to go with cards or mediumship is really just based on, what they're feeling at the time. At the end of the day, I feel like for, you know, job, money, love, things like that, it doesn't really matter which way you go. You're going to get the same information. But I definitely feel like with card readings, especially with oracle card readings, with the way that I do read, that it's really going to pick up mostly what's going on around you, as opposed to just kind of singling out one person, et cetera, et cetera.
So, what do you, whenever somebody asks you what you do for a living, what do you tell them?
So I normally tell them that I'm a witch. And I always think it's funny because some people are like, okay, whatever. And then other people, normally people who stick around, are either interested and they want to learn about it, or they just, leave, which is also fine. But I do work for a metaphysical store, so I'm in it all the time. And most of the people that I've surrounded myself with in my life either know about it or they're interested in learning about it. So it's not necessarily something where I have a lot of outside people who don't already know what I do, because normally the people that I meet that are new are either word of mouth or people that I meet at events or things like that. As far as in my personal life, it's the same thing. A lot of the friends that I have are all kind of met through metaphysical means, or they're interested in what I do, so we just kind of became friends from that and things like that. So I feel like it's not necessarily as big of a deal when I tell people as it is when other people may kind of express. And I'm very blessed in that way, because there are a lot of people that can't really talk about what they do or what their interests are because people around them think that they're weird or whatever. But I'm very lucky to not have people like that in my life.
What is the most interesting event that you've ever worked?
In what way?
Like whenever you go out to do these kinds of things, like going to the wellness expo or like specialty events that you get called out to.
So there have been a few times where I've gone out to do especially readings for parties and things like that. The most interesting event that I've ever kind of experienced at something like that, there was an event where we did a psychic party. It was my mom and I and my kid sister. We all went to this lady's house and we all had a good time, etc. Whatever. But there was a lady that came back to just see me after we did a gallery, and she told me that a year ago when I had seen her, I told her that her whole life was going to shift and be turned on its head, and she was going to be finding these new jobs, and she didn't believe me, and she wanted to tell me that a year later all of the things happened exactly the way that I did, except for I forgot one part, and that was that she got pregnant. So it was pretty interesting, at least to get the feedback, as far as just interest at an event, but interesting things that have happened to me in general while on the job. House clearings tend to be the most interesting kind of thing that I do. There have been a few times where we've gone out and just, there's not really anything in the house. Things just need to be kind of moved around and cleared. And we go outside and all of the cows from all the farms behind them have come to the fence to watch. And, things like that are pretty interesting as far as being in touch with nature and being in touch with the animals. And obviously that they're feeling and seeing the energy that's around. But the most interesting thing that's ever happened on a house clearing would be being able to kind of find the reasons behind why something is happening. So, for example, in a lot of new homes, I've noticed that the electronics aren't grounded as much as older homes, just because of how they're building and how quickly they're building them. And I've noticed that a lot of house clearings that I do are in newer homes because the energy is attracted and it amps up whatever, wily spirit may be walking through, and it kind of amplifies it and gives it something to kind of boost its own energy off of. And that's always very interesting to me, to kind of figure out ways to fix that without actually doing anything with the electric.
So whenever you do house clearing, have you ever had an experience like on TV where like things are like flying around or anything?
So we have, my mom and I go on a lot of house clearings together. Just recently, there was a lady that we cleared a house for. We've cleared her house several times. And there just couldn't seem to be any relief. And we went upstairs, and there was one particular side bedroom But she did never go in because her mom had stayed there, it was pulling her feet, et cetera, et cetera. So when we went into that room, I stood in the middle of the floor, and it was almost like the whole floor wanted to cave in around me. All of the clothes in the closet started moving, all of the stuff around there was like the air just stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty interesting as far as like stuff you see on TV. It's almost like the build up. Like if you don't take care of this, then all of a sudden everything's going to start bursting open. And that's pretty interesting. But I have had just in other situations chairs pull out and things like that. Mostly just benign. They're not malicious by any means. More of just like attention. Um, but it's preferable that way.
So for the last question, what is the most interesting session you've had? Like, has anything come across that was just so crazy that you just couldn't even?
So there have been a lot of sessions where I feel like when we really start to read, um, even without knowing background, history on the person or anything like that, just based on what I've been able to pull through, there have been several sessions, and I feel like it's almost a theme. For me, not necessarily a good theme, but a theme where people will have repressed childhood memories or abuse or things like that they've recently discovered happened that they had something they've repressed.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's a lot of times that when I do sessions, um, it's almost like just a counseling session as opposed to really doing a lot of intuitive work, especially after we've read the cards. But it's always interesting to me because I, even growing up, wanted to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I was always very interested in learning how the human brain worked and things like that from a scientific standpoint. And what I do, it always amuses me because I always say that I always ended up doing the same thing anyway. The way that you see people, the way that you interact with people is normally in their most vulnerable times. It's why it's so important to take everything they say seriously because you don't want someone leaving feeling like they just poured their whole heart out to someone who's going to make fun of them or something like that, which unfortunately can happen sometimes. And when people come to see me for readings, I always want to make sure that they feel comfortable with what they say and know that what they say is confidential and things like that. But I think the most interesting thing as a reader is getting session after session where the people are talking about the exact same thing. It's almost like they discussed it before they walked into the room, where every single person for the next month are going to have the same issue that they're dealing with. And you almost start to feel like you just give the same recommendations and you're not really in it. And then same thing when someone comes back and says, you don't understand how much that helped me. You don't understand how much, that changed my life. Or I thought it was crazy at first and then I actually did it and I realized that it helped everything, it changed everything that I was saying. And it really humbles you and makes you realize and remember why you even got into it in the first place. So
Well, thank you, Destiny, for spending the time with us to discuss all of these things.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.